Carl, I wanted to cover one last thing, and it was exactly what you had referenced earlier, actually, which was this new recruitment effort by the CIA. So, under the Trump administration, there was a deep hope that the deep state was on the outs. But it appears that there is a renewed focus on the attempt of the CIA itself to recruit, as the New York Times reports, Chinese nationals with new videos. It reflects a priority from the CIA Director John Ratcliffe, who has placed increasing emphasis on the agency's intelligence collection on China. So, a pair of new CIA videos released on May 1st aim to encourage Chinese nationals to spy for the agency, appealing to their frustrations and fears with the government and its corruption. They're modeled on a series of videos the agency made in recent year asking Russians to spy for the United States, appeals CIA leaders said helped develop new sources. Now, I want to actually pull up and play a segment um, of this just so people can get a feel. So as you have talked about, Carl, this video is all about a frustrated Chinese official who is looking for a path out of quote unquote hardship and toil. Here is the video. It's in Mandarin and there are subtitles. So I'll play it on silent, just read those subtitles. I had to forge my own path. And there you can see him to do or not to do. The answer is obvious. We can no longer stand still. I refused to lie down and took the first step, always the hardest. It's time to build my own dream. There you see the CIA. It's the dream. And there you see he said yes to the CIA. And here comes the message to join the CIA now. There you go, the emblem and all. So, Carl, talk about, will this succeed? China has experience with the CIA attempting to infiltrate its country. It has a massive anti-corruption campaign now. Is this going to succeed?
Okay, so there's a lot of misunderstanding, you know, particularly these Western China focused quote unquote China hand has about China. Even people who have studied in China, who have lived in China, but work for these think tanks and CIA front organizations, they thinks that this ultimately this goes to that same mentality that was exposed in the Vietnam War era movie, Full Metal Jacket. Remember when the sergeant says, "Inside every gook, there's an American dying to get out." I mean, that's still the same mentality that permeates these thinkings around China or East Asia. People still think, oh, they're just like everyone is a potential American consumers that's ready to join us. That's not the case. China has been, I think, the most pro Western generation in China are the people who grow up in the 60s, 70s, and maybe even early 80s, because those people who witnessed firsthand, especially during the early 80s, during the open and reform period, when they saw emerging out of cultural revolution, they saw the huge gap in the material living standard between China and the developed West. And many of them, turned them into like diehard pro-Western liberals. But for the generation that grew up after Cultural Revolution, I'm the first post-Cultural Revolution generation. I was born 1 month after Mao passed away. So from my personal experience, that life was getting better and better every year in China. But for the people who are born in the 90s, I was born in 1976, but for the Chinese people who were born in the 90s and 2000s, their experience was drastically different. They have been born into a much more stronger and more self-confident China. And their experience was that United States was this persistent hostile power that's trying to kneecap China's progress. So if anything, the people who are born in the 90s and 2000s, they're way more nationalistic than I am. Okay, if the CIA video is to work, and if they're manage to find some recruits somehow, the video somehow resonate with them, I must say they're probably racking up the dumbest people in China that's willing to work with CIA after watching that video. I it and also we know that China has been onto their tactics for a while. We have the articles from New York Times that says in 2012 China basically killed all the CIA networks in China. This is another informational asymmetry. Chinese people on average actually understood more about the West than vice versa. There's a lot more Chinese people can read and speak English and travel abroad than Americans who have been to China, have a passable Chinese language skills, can read and write. So this is why they're, like in the art of war, Sun Tzu said, know yourself and know your enemies. That will make sure you emerge victorious out of 100 battles. But the problem with the U.S. is that it barely knows itself. It barely knows its own strengths and weaknesses. And so, yeah, I'm not worried. I don't think Chinese government is worried about this kind of amateurish videos.
Well, here is that report that you're talking about, Carl. Killing CIA informants, China crippled U.S. spying operations. This was published during the first Trump administration. And it talked about systematically the Chinese government in 2010 dismantled CIA spying operations in the country, imprisoning or killing more than a dozen sources over 2 years, and crippling intelligence gathering there for years afterward. And actually, Brian, I remember under the Biden administration, it was William Burns, I believe, the CIA director, who called for a new mission center for both China and Iran, precisely because U.S. intelligence has had such a huge difficulty rebuilding their spy networks. But those mission centers are not going to be located in China. So your thoughts on this dynamic, because it gets right into that coercion and that asymmetry that you were talking about, Brian, or that you've been working on so much.
I think Carl brought up a really important point. The type of people that you're going to attract, especially now, with these type of campaigns, they are usually, I wouldn't say unintelligent. I don't think that's quite fair, but they're ignorant. They're extremely profoundly ignorant. They also have severe character flaws, and I'm talking about the most selfish, self-centered, short-sighted people imaginable that you will ever meet. Because I know, because I've met the US-backed opposition here in Thailand. I've studied them for years. I've been in their offices before I was before I did public videos and wrote under my own name. I wrote under a pen name, and I was in their offices while I was writing articles about them. They didn't even know I was there. And like I said, these are very selfish, greedy, ignorant people. And so the quality of an opposition made up, you build an army up of these type of people, but what is it ultimately capable of doing? And we see all around the globe what it's capable of doing is destroying and knocking things down, but it's not so good at building things up. And if a nation, especially a nation like China, is more than capable of defending itself against the chaos, they really don't have to worry about anything being built that displaces the system that's already in place. I would say a country like Thailand, the biggest threat Thailand faces is these kind of people creating space where the US is then building alternate institutions in it. So I think the threat really isn't inside of China, it's along China's periphery. I've always advocated for an ASEAN-wide, or even just each individual nation here in Southeast Asia, working together with nations like Russia and China that have successfully secured their information space, their education system, and their political system, to work together to wall off these countries from this type of interference. It is against international law, as according to the UN Charter. Every single nation has a right to do it. The reason that they don't is usually because the US says, if you uproot our NED-funded opposition, we will crush you with sanctions. Your kids are studying overseas in the US. We'll take away their visas. Maybe we'll detain them. You will never travel to the West. All of your assets in the West will be taken. And unfortunately, a lot of people in these other countries, they still have this deep desire to be accepted by the West. And so this is a deterrent to actually standing up for their own nation's best interest, because they're still so obsessed with this idea of a West that no longer exists. I was watching the CIA, as Carl was talking, I was watching it on mute on his X feed, and this guy is standing at a window, and it's like a city 40 years in the future. If you live in America, and it's like 40 years in the future, there's literally flying cars, and he's like, "Oh, this is so terrible." You're like, you know what would really seal America's fate is if they forced any of these Chinese CIA agents to do something in the U.S., like do a retreat or something in the U.S., and to be like, "What have I done?
Yeah.
Why did I sign
Seriously.
up for this?"
Yeah. Send them to any U.S. city compared to.
I would be a spy for China, but I'm scared that they'll send me to the U.S. to do
Yeah.
my work.
And